pattern that was then spun into the tights that, you know, British gentry were wearing here as a display of their wealth. And there are many portraits that depict these men displaying their wealth. And yet that history isn't widely known. You know, there are so many such as Samuel Pepys, who, you know, is a poet that is very, very much revered in British history. But what's not talked about or known much about him is, you know, the fact that he was a plantation owner. And so much of his wealth was built off of, you know, the violence to both black men and women's bodies. So kind of charting that history, looking at the women that supported the NHS, such as my mother, and their experiences, you know, when they moved to this country, it was at a time when racism was at its height. And so they're trying to, you know, they're coming from a place of care for patients and experiencing, you know, racist remarks and in some cases, you know, even violence. So thinking about how that affects Black women's mental health, but then also looking more widely at the fashion industry and how, you know, there's this kind of Western standard of beauty, this feminine ideal that so many of us kind of groomed to assimilate to, but we can never achieve that kind of form of beauty because it's not us. And so how all of these things kind of chip away at our self-worth and our sense of womanhood and beauty, but also all that kind of generational trauma that's passed down because it's never dealt with, it's kind of bedded down and it kind of manifests very physically. And so that's where the kind of healing aspect comes in these kind of performative acts. And so it's very much a place for me to grow and have this experience of healing, which I have done and am doing still through this body of work. But it's also about how can I also create that space for the wider community, obviously very much for Black women, but I think more so for the wider community because that history is all our history. We're all affected by it, and that trauma kind of affects us all and is within us all. And I think as well, I'm just really blessed because craft, the art of making, I truly believe is a very kind of healing practice. It's a very meditative practice. And I think any way that you make with your hands, and it's something that has been talked about across many different communities during this period about doing something craft-based or doing something that's making with the hand, be it cooking or whatever it is. It's that act that kind of makes you go to another space, a more reflective space, and that can be very freeing because I think we live in a world that is so hectic that you don't really take that time for quiet, and a lot of these practices facilitate that time for quiet. So I think that's where the light comes in, and you know, even through the research there is a lot of stuff that's very heavy and kind of weighs on me, but once I start making, I feel I channel all of that into the work, and so yeah, that brings me like personally as well, and then I hope that the performances can do that for, you know, the wider society and for the Black women in my community as well.
Out of interest, at what point did you weave performance into art?
So that started very recently. So my first performance was in 2018, and it's very much linked to this body of work. So initially it was because I was invited to deliver a paper at a conference, and being an artist, I didn't want to do the usual death by PowerPoint. I wanted something that would be really engaging, that the audience could connect to more. And so I developed this concept for a performance, and it was a very kind of simple act, and I brought in my artwork, and there was kind of an audio monologue that I'd recorded before that. And then I was invited to respond to an exhibition at the Henry Moore Institute in Leeds by Sengeneng Goody, who is an absolute inspiration of mine. So she's an African-American artist who also uses tights to create work, so very sculptural based, and looking more at how the female form changes over time. So she was actually inspired by her own experience of pregnancy and how her body changed through those periods, and obviously as you grow older. And so her use of tights was kind of in homage to that, and she would also activate them through performance as well. So there were many links to our practice. And it really kind of started me on this road of performance and having it be that space to provide healing by kind of activating artworks or creating artworks. And then I got the opportunity to perform in Venice, and that was very much around my body of work, new to me. And I think that's when the kind of real shift occurred. And I really found that there are things that I can say through performance that you can't say just with, artwork. It brings a much more layered meaning to the work. And obviously it's a much more vulnerable way of communicating. It's just yourself in this very intimate space directly in front of your audience. And it's just really kind of opened up this kind of new channel, new medium for me to express the things that I want to say. And just the way that it resonates with audiences as well has been a really kind of a space of growth for me as well. And I'm really excited about, developing it further, and exploring the ways that I can kind of create through this medium.
What you do is fantastic. I'm a real fan of immersive art, and actually I think it's probably one for Mimi from a curation perspective. I've noticed a real shift in exhibitions incorporating multimedia, immersion. Do you think there was a reason why there's been this major sort of shift, particularly in London, actually? And do you think this is just a trend, or do you think this is the way things are going to be going in future?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the artist and the work that's being exhibited. I kind of hope that it does go more that way, because like a great idea or like a piece of art is nothing unless you really feel it. And I think the multisensory kind of ways of curation are like super powerful. Like the first one that came to my mind when you said that was, I don't know if you ever went to the Alexander McQueen exhibition at the V&A. It's called Savage Beauty, and that was super immersive. I felt like, you go into a room and you hear the music from the show and it's cold, and there's even like a certain smell, and it's conjuring like all these thoughts as you're looking at the work, and like memories, and it's kind of like triggering, but in a really positive way. Like you're like feeling the work as opposed to just seeing it. And that's like obviously had this kind of like profound impact. And when I think of like the probably say my favorite exhibitions that I've ever been to, I think actually thinking about that now, they probably all have that kind of same multisensory effect. But what I'm like really excited to see, and like what I'm very interested to see progressing, and I think like especially now dealing with isolation, is how that is going to translate into an online space. Because I mean, as much as there are people playing with like AR, VR exhibitions at the moment, I know like big institutions like the RA are doing kind of like, virtual online exhibitions. I've not personally seen anything that's like blown me away from a kind of curational standpoint, where like, a gallery having different colored spaces, different fonts, different everything to kind of complement the work. And so I think that's going to be really fascinating to watch that develop.
Yeah, you've actually preempted something I was going to ask you, because it's another quote from you.
Oh gosh, horrible.
Yeah, you said, I believe that you should physically stand before art as often as possible. So good for your mental health.
Yes, tougher now.
Time. And how we're going to get over this challenge.
Yeah, sorry, I think you zoned or like timed out for a second there.
I wondered how we're going to get around it this time. Obviously, as you've identified, people are trying. But what effect is that going to have? Say it's so good for your mental health.
Totally.
What options do we have?
It's a good question. I guess we're all like hanging on to the hope that everything's going to open up again pretty soon, because I know that I'm definitely feeling the lack of, just like not being able to go to an exhibition. I find that the most kind of like mentally healing, nourishing thing that I can do. And obviously yeah, like it's amazing. I'm like feel very lucky and grateful to have some artwork in my home. This is like, it highlights the need, I think, for affordable art as well, and public art, so that people can engage with art in the spaces that they have access to, and taking it out of like an elite setting. And that's again like another hope of mine for Darklight, is that it becomes, you know, a really accessible means for people to have access to art in their homes, because it's affordably priced, but it's also accessible in the way that we use language. So like the people, you know, our audience that we're looking at, they would, you know, probably feel really intimidated and uncomfortable in a sort of traditional commercial gallery setting or an art fair, that would just like, it's not for them. So the way that we want to approach like language and everything else around our site is going to be really, yeah, just like open and friendly and non-condescending. I think that's it, like the need for accessible art is going to be greater now than ever.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail on the head, and I think this time has highlighted that we need physical. And you know, I struggle with this from being a music artist. You can't just live online. People need to experience things live, and you know, I'm very physical. You know, I wish we could go back to the time where there were physical albums, and where it was all, you know, albums you buy in shops and a live experience. Unfortunately, technology has meant, I shouldn't say unfortunately, because it's got many positives about it.
Hey, look at us now. Wild.
Enables, I think there are solutions that we can find very, very quickly, and we can react quickly with technology. But is it sustainable? Bring happiness in the long term? I think we need a blend of the two. So yes, that's fascinating though.
No, I find that also like a really good point though. It's like I find that in general, it's the tangible experiences that make you feel good in any kind of lasting way, rather than having like a kind of like quick hit from your phone, or like a notification that kind of like gives you a peak of like adrenaline almost, and then like kind of leaves you feeling a bit down. It's like you said, doing stuff with your hands, craft. I saw earlier on Instagram that there was a company, although I think it's Australia based, that is like delivering clay and kind of like instructions for how to make your own like plant pot or something. A photographer put it on her story, and I thought like, oh, that's amazing. Like, I would love to do that. But yeah, humans, like we need to do stuff with our hands to feel, that's going to sound really weird, what I was just about to say, to feel good.
Yeah, exactly what you mean, don't worry.
Yeah.
I want to continue along the line of curation, because I know this is, you know, a world that both of you are experienced in, and one for Enam. How do you think curation is being changed or challenged at this time? And by this time, I don't mean Corona time. I mean perhaps over the last few years, and going forwards.
I think technology has definitely had an effect. And I think what's been really interesting to see is the fact that more and more people are looking to the non-conventional spaces rather than the traditional white cube to exhibit works or to create kind of artistic interventions. And I think that is really quite powerful, because again, it kind of speaks to what you were saying, Mimi, about accessibility. And you know, just doing something in like a car park where, you know, anyone walking by can kind of pop into and then experience and immerse themselves in art, I think is so amazing. And it's the reality that, you know, a lot of these kind of gallery spaces do kind of come across quite elitist, and you know, there's this idea of exclusivity. And so I think, you know, the onus is on kind of curators to be that vessel to facilitate, you know, artistic engagement in spaces that anyone can access, and feel enriched by. And I think that has been happening. I think that's really, really interesting. Obviously, right now, a lot of stuff is going online. You're seeing a lot of these online viewing rooms as a way to kind of experience art. But I definitely, again, agree with what Mimi was saying, that there's nothing like experiencing an artwork in real life. And so many people will say that, you know, to myself, to the artists in my network, that, you know, seeing a picture posted on Instagram is one thing, but when you actually see it in real life and you're able to really kind of connect with the layers and the texture and the tactility and, you know, the depth of the color in the works, it's a whole different experience. So, and I know that's definitely true for my work because it's textile based, you know, what you see behind me, to experience it in real life, all the layers and ruffles and the burnout and the texture within the work is so different to seeing it on a screen. And so, yeah, the sooner we can get back to that, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was meant to be fingers crossed, but I'm not very dexterous. My ring's on.
I'm going to move on to the various movements, collectives, businesses that you're both involved with. Obviously, Enam, you founded the BBFA collective, and Mimi, Visual Diet. I'd love to know more about Visual Diet and to tell our audience. We are now live on YouTube.
Great.
We knew. No pressure.
Fantastic words. So yeah, tell us more about what this is about and where the idea came from.
Yeah, so Visual Diet, firstly I co-founded it with Marine Tongi, who's founder of NTR Agency, Enam's sort of agency, which is connecting all of the dots. She's amazing. So she actually gave a TED talk a couple of years ago on how social media visuals affect our minds. And I sort of like really hung on to like this term Visual Diet that she used. I was like, this is amazing. Like I've been thinking this all the time, constantly, every day. Anyway, she like got in touch and we met up to talk about it. And I think we sat for like, I don't know, 2 hours or something, because we just had so much to say. And then like that conversation's just been ongoing since then. And it's taken us to kind of lots of amazing places. But the sort of crux of it is that we are super well educated as a people now about like the fact that you are what you eat and what you put in your body affects how you feel, how you function, all of that. But we don't have the same level of understanding of our mental health and how what we see affects how we feel. There's kind of it's a tricky one because you could really like take in so many different directions. Our like starting focus for it was quite social media centric, just because we figured of all the stuff that you see, all of the imagery that you see around us from like, you know, advertising or like stuff on TV, magazines, art, like it's good and bad stuff. Social media seemed to be to us the only kind of platform or space where you could actually control what you were seeing to a certain extent, and it was to a greater extent then before they had like all of the adverts on Instagram. But you know, you choose who you follow and what you want to look at. So we're really just trying to create a movement to empower people to like make that a really nourishing, inspiring space, and like take control of it, unfollow anything that made them feel really bad about themselves, because it's kind of like a weird, like you're inflicting it on yourself to an extent again. So, you know, if you're aware that something's making you feel bad, unfollow it, get rid of it, only look at things that making you feel really positive, inspired and good about yourself and the world around you. That's kind of like how it all came to be. And like I said, I could kind of go off on a tangent because it's such an all-encompassing subject, and it's something that I felt super strongly about. I still do, of course, but the like visual landscape here in Amsterdam is very different to in London. It feels like a lot less kind of aggressive in a way, because there's not much in the way of outdoor advertising. So that's like a really, I feel the like relief of it. And it was actually one of the reasons for me leaving London was I was just feeling super, down and kind of a bit trapped by just this like overly saturated world of images and text and everything vying for your attention all the time. I found it really mentally exhausting. And I work in, you know, photography and art. Like I love imagery, it's my life, but it was getting to be way too much. But but it's more about the types of images rather than, I guess it's like to an extent the type of imagery you're seeing and also the number, like the amount of imagery. So yeah, I've just taken a step back and like a bit more selective about what I look at, and it's worked. I think I've maybe proven the theory for myself anyway.
I think you're definitely right, and at this precise moment in time, in isolation, the volume of imagery, of messages, of very overwhelming, and I think that's a really fascinating thing that you've identified there. How are you spreading the word?
Sorry?
How are you spreading the word?
So funnily is like a lot of it through Instagram, but then we've done several campaigns. So the first campaign that we did, we shot, well actually firstly we had an event at my old agency in London, MSC Saatchi, which Enam was at, which is really cool, like a panel event. And so we had an exhibition with Adelaide Demoa and like several of the artists like Clémence Vazard, who are with MTR, and really beautiful work all responding to that theme of art and mental health. So we had a kind of like, event, panel, discussion. We shot a campaign with Rankin, who was, funnily, I went in to speak to him in his studio because I saw that at Hunger magazine, they were posting loads about similar topic. And I was kind of surprised that it was coming from him because, I mean, he has been known to kind of propagate the like supermodel, hyper retouched, kind of like very overtly sexualized view of men and women, but you know, mainly women in the 90s. So I was really surprised at how passionate he was about it, and he really was, and said it was, you know, a conversation that he's having with his team on a daily basis, and he was super behind the project. So to campaign with him, and then that took us on like Sky News and like all over a bunch of different places, which was great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I think I remember that campaign.
Huh?
I think I remember that campaign.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was a selfie harm. So yeah, the images of young boys and gals who adapted their image on a phone app to look like their kind of social media avatar self. It's kind of creepy, but yeah, hopefully quite impactful. And then we've done a bunch of other projects since then, but I'm kind of conscious of time and not talking about it's like talking over you, giving you space to talk as well.
We'll scoot over to Enam to talk about the BBFA now.
Yeah.
How that came to be.
I started the collective back in 2015, and it really kind of came out of my own kind of frustrations in trying to navigate the art world. So I kind of really started practicing, or you know, my career I should say, back in 2010. And to that point, I'd kind of had a hiatus, but I was kind of just really finding it difficult to find the right platforms to exhibit and to kind of get my work out there, and talk to other artists and kind of feeling, you know, finding they felt the same, and just thinking about, you know, the art world as I knew it, and realizing that actually I didn't know of any kind of Black women artists. I couldn't name any. I knew of Yinka Shonibare and Chris Ofili and a few other men, but where were the women? And so that kind of charged me with this purpose of creating a collective, just thinking that, you know, in us coming together, we're kind of a stronger voice. And there were a few artists within my network that I reached out to, and I also ran a call for artists. And so the members, so the first four were Adelaide Demoa, who Mimi mentioned, who a painter and performance artist and an absolute gem of a human being. And Aisha Faisal, another gem, who is a painter. Rita, you met her. And Carlene de Souza, who is an amazing, absolutely like crazy street artist. And we originally had 8 members, and memberships kind of gone up, down, and now we're kind of back to the kind of founding 4 members. And it's very much about kind of creating these sustainable careers for us and supporting each other. But, you know, there's also more that we know that we need to do. Kind of in putting the collective together, I started researching, because I felt like there must be other women artists that have gone before the people that I know of. And so this is me in my 30s now learning about seminal artists like Marlene Smith and Claudette Johnson and Lubena Himid, and realizing that it's almost like a vicious circle. They had some notoriety in the 80s and then almost disappeared, and they'd obviously continued working and even been working in education, and yet they weren't getting the same kind of platform as the male artists that came after them and were part of this kind of YBA movement. And so I felt like there's obviously things need to change, and so part of our work is to try and facilitate that by working with institutions, so working across education space and in the commercial and art worlds, art spaces, to bring much more representation. And I always talk about the fact that even the language around how art by Black artists is framed needs to change. And a lot of the time it is around cultural heritage or identity or identity politics. And I feel like there's so much more that our work is talking about, and there's so much more just within the artistry of the work that needs to be talked about. And looking at education and trying to kind of bring much more equity into the curriculum, so that young people are seeing themselves reflected in the books that they're looking at, in the artists that their teachers are creating projects around, and it not just being these same old white men that are taught year after year after year for every generation. And then it's also about what work we can do to help artists coming up behind us as well. So trying to implement an incubator program once the revenue exists to do so, just to provide that support and one of the things that we didn't have when we were starting out. So how can we help the next generation kind of navigate or not have to deal with the same challenges? And then working more globally to connect with other Black women artists and across different regions to open up that conversation. It's something that we talk about within the collective, and the fact that, if you're an artist working, say, for instance, in Ghana, where we did our first cross-cultural exchange, race isn't going to be an issue, but gender is, because it's a very patriarchal society. So in any kind of region, there are still issues that you're going to come across that prevent you from kind of breaking that glass ceiling. So I think by coming together, like we said, coming together as a collective, doing that on a much wider scale helps everyone, because it's helping all of us achieve that equity that we kind of desperately need. And yeah, it's been a really amazing journey, actually. Just the reception that we've had since we started has just been really refreshing to see, and we've done some really amazing projects and had partnerships with Tate, with Adidas, so many. I'm just really thankful, and I'm always saying that I'm thankful for the sisterhood as well, to have that support system, that network. We're always coming together just for peer review, talking through. We do studio visits, which are always so much fun. Just seeing how, as artists, we're continuously developing our work, and, we feed off of each other as well. Adelaide, as I said, she's a performance artist as well. And it's just been great to be able to have that person that we can kind of, bounce ideas off of. So there are so many benefits, I think, to collectives and, the work that we're doing, just really at the start. There's so much more that we want to accomplish. So yeah, we're really excited for the years ahead.
Yeah. I think that is a major obstacle and challenge for any artist across the board, be it artist, music artist. I spoke to 2 creative writers last week. It's a solitary endeavor.
Yeah.
And finding like-minded individuals, I know it's helped me so much over the years. Finding a little collective of musicians who I can and who I can trust and who I can go to has been so important. But obviously another major challenge, I know it's highlighted a lot in the art world is being a woman. And Mimi, is this something that you see as an obstacle? Have you noticed any changes? Yeah.
So my background kind of before I moved here is predominantly in advertising, and like working in a creative department in an ad agency. Like it is still, yeah, very kind of male dominated. It obviously varies a little agency to agency, but yeah, and depending a lot, I think, on the creative director or head of art and who they bring into the team. When I started at my last agency, there was, yeah, I'm definitely not 50-50, but there were quite a few female teams, and then they sort of seemed to, that was off the back of having a kind of a female creative director who then left, and then the teams dwindled, and then I think it got to a stage where I was the only female in a department of 40, and it is like a weird feeling because it's not weird in a way. In certain settings, like you don't even notice it, but if you had that role reversed and there was one guy in an all-female department, I think they would feel really the impact of that. And like I don't know, like it's a situation that I think men don't often find themselves in. In terms of it being a barrier, can be. I think like mentally, for some people it's more challenging, or some women like may not be, or a lot of women would not be super comfortable in that kind of situation. And it can be hard, I think, then to find kind of female mentors and role models, because again, like as you go up through the ranks in like any creative field, you know, the women get fewer and fewer the higher you go, and so it's hard to just like find people that you can assimilate with, that look like you or that you relate to, and you could kind of feel like you could ask for advice. Yeah, it's difficult. I don't know if you like, I'm sure you find that in the music industry as well, or
Absolutely. I also think it's something that is spoken about so widely now, but continues to be a challenge. So yeah, I think we can only continue to do our best, form alliances.
Totally. And like also just it's such a responsibility and like a position of power if you're in a position like I was to be a commissioner at a big ad agency where we're like, you know, commissioning heaps of shoots and jobs going through, and it's like I'm gonna always have at least like an even mix of people, and like I'm never gonna just present you with the easiest options, which may be like 3 white men, because you know they're everywhere. Like a lot of the big photographic agencies, at least until recently, were almost exclusively male. It was the easy option to just kind of like pick white man, because they're there and like it takes less time, but it's such a huge responsibility to make sure that you are, and it's your job as well. It's like a real privileged position to make sure that you're doing your research and putting your time in. And if you haven't found the right person for the job, then like keep looking and work late.
Yeah,
it's not that hard.
Yeah. I think the music world, obviously, you know, going back to our friend technology, we can be independent musicians now, and that's wonderful, and steer our careers in whatever direction we want, and that is largely the direction I've chosen to go in, having been part of a big label in the past. The thing is, the decision makers are still the men. So you get so far, and the decision makers are still it's in the hands of the men.
So I wanted to ask as well, like how are your days in isolation? Has that changed a lot for you?
It hasn't, in certain respects. Obviously, you know, being a freelance, we determine our schedule you know, every day anyway. It hasn't changed as much as some of my friends who've been used to going to an office. The thing that I am finding difficult, and actually it was a question for you, I have so many questions for you guys.
Flattering.
Something that Gemma from Write and Shine from the seminar last week, a place that she comes from, and it's about being times of day that you're creative, or putting yourself in a context that is creative. And she set up Write and Shine, where she believes that from the hours of 7 till 9 in the morning, or first thing in the morning, we are the most creative, because we don't have
not me
everything hitting. Exactly.
I'm very much asleep for half of those hours.
But the thing I haven't quite got into my rhythm yet is finding that time to be my most creative, optimizing my creativity. And really I love traveling, and I enjoy writing, and I have the pressure at the moment of having to write a second part of an album. We pretty much got a date in the diary, and obviously that relied on me traveling, and we're doing Skype sessions, which is exciting in itself, but it doesn't put me in that headspace of newness, of freshness, that actually I'm my most creative at that point. So yeah, it's a learning curve for me.
All fun and games.
All fun and games, but we'll get through it. I'm going to whiz on to the last few questions, and unfortunately whiz past a few that I did want to ask as well, but we'll have to find another time. What can the audience look forward to from you both? What's coming up?
What is coming up? So I had a few things in the works. Actually, today I was due to be performing at 2 Temple Place. And obviously that unfortunately has had to be cancelled. And so we're looking to reschedule in the future. And that would mean kind of tweaking the performance a little, because it was in response to an exhibition that they have on view, or they did have on view at the moment. But I think it'll be quite interesting, because I don't know if either of you have been to 2 Temple Place, but it's an absolutely stunning building. And I'm really excited about the opportunity of activating it with performance in the way that I do, and just kind of responding to the environment, because obviously performance is also very much about, you know, the space that you inhabit. So I'm super excited about that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was on a residency prior to kind of the pandemic really kind of taking effect. And so when things go back to normal, I hopefully will be returning to Morocco to continue my work, which I'm still doing while I'm here in lockdown as well. So that's actually, it's great, because it's providing me that outlet during this time. And then an exhibition, which again has been postponed till next year, which is in Bordeaux in France. So I'm super excited for that as well. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
What about you, Mimi?
So nice. Yeah, so let me split it into two. So on the visual diet front, we are kind of continuing the movement, and I would love to invite you actually both to supply us with like any images that you feel are like really positive and uplifting, because we're just kind of trying to do a bit of an open source movement, and yeah, spread positivity through the Instagram, and kind of like, yeah, flip a place that can be filled with dread and anxiety into, like, you know, a nice art space that's like in your own personal art gallery on your phone. So with that, yeah, we're looking to, you know, when we come out of this, do some sort of brand collaborations. We have a few ideas in the pipeline, so hopefully something will start to reform as the economy picks up again. And then, yeah, of course, with Dark Light, the launch is imminent. I mean, as soon as we're working with an amazing printer called Metro Imaging, and they are obviously out of office at the moment, and their printers are big beasts and not movable. So we're kind of on hold waiting for our suppliers at the moment. And then we'll be launching with a lot of editorial content and kind of unveiling our artists, which is really exciting. So
And
Yeah.
can you just tell the audience how we can find you on socials, any websites?
Yeah. So on Instagram, I have 3 now, which is fun. mimigray.jpg, darklight 2_art, and visual.diet.
And Enam?
So on Instagram, I'm at enamgd, and the website is enamgdesigns.com. And then for the collective, it's at BBFA Collective on Instagram, and then the website is bbfacollective.org.
Awesome. And now
Amazing.
three quick fire questions.
Ooh.
Here's off. I am most creative when I feel the light or feel the dark.
Dark every time.
For me, it's both. It can be either or.
Okay.
Diplomatic.
If I were not an artist or a curator, I would be a.
Ooh.
Possibly a good.
Oh God, what would I be? I'm having a meltdown.
I know. When you said anything creative, anything else I would be creative.
Yeah. Oh, but that's good you're going that way. I was going to say like a breeder of Sphinx cats. It's the first thing that came to my head. I definitely wouldn't do that. Where's that stupid cat? Owner of exotic tigers. Mimi Exotic.
That's
I wouldn't do that. Been watching too much TV, guys.
Oh, if that's the case, maybe I'd be like, you know, a spy.
Ooh, nice. Yeah, detective would be good. Wouldn't mind that.
And finally, I stay creative for my or who or what.
Oh, for me, I would say it's for myself, for my own well-being. It's who I am. I couldn't be me without being creative.
I'm going to really uncreatively steal that answer and say like that's exactly what I was going to say. There's no other answer. Like you have to do it for yourself. Have to do what makes you happy. Obviously, I want to support artists as well. Do it for the artists as well. But as long as everyone's feeling good, doing what they're doing, then that is box ticked.
Guys, it's been amazing talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Reva.
And thank you for watching. Look forward to seeing you all again for our next episode. In the meantime, stay tuned at www.thiswomansheart.co.uk and on our Instagram platform at thiswomansheart_. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, and you.
Really nice to meet you both. Bye.
And you, Mimi. See you
yeah.
stuff.
I kind of want to like end this chat and then do another one so I can ask more questions.
You do that.
Can we do that?
Bye, guys.
Bye.